the left will be. Now the fight begins.
Right, exactly.
And that's how it's going to be. And I
Yeah.
guess it's going to be like that for a long time.
I think there might be a more
Well,
radical
I mean,
left now.
You heard the Republicans. What are they going to do if she wins? I mean, they were all prepared for that one.
Right.
We're not going to confirm any appointment. We're not going to, So I mean, we were doomed either way. I think now the Democrats, really.
Folks, welcome inside the Parisi Palace, high above 2919 East Broadway. This is a special edition of the Jake Feinberg Show, coming to you live on Power Talk. Please go to our website, powertalk.live. Download our free app and stream all of our live local programming, including Solomon on Blast and the Jim Parisi Show, and yours truly, the Jake Feinberg Show. And we are delighted that you made us part of your day today, because after a humbling evening in my household and for millions of households across the country, I'm going to get to feel a little bit better by being able to converse with a master rhythmist, a cat that has played with some of the heaviest masters, including his brother Jimmy, John Coltrane, Mtume, always creating spiritual music that transcends anything on this planet, and we need his wisdom more than ever before. Albert Tootie Heath, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Hey, Jake, how you doing, brother? I talked to Mtume this morning, and he predicted this disaster that we just had, and this is an election.
I mean, you're saying he predicted it after the fact, or he predicted it?
No, way before. A month ago, he told me that Trump was going to win. And I said, "Come on, man." But
Yeah.
He did two predictions that I told him this morning. I said, "Listen, the next one you do, I'm not going to say that I don't believe you." He did the basketball thing with Cleveland. He said Cleveland was going to whip. He said. I said, "Man, what about the babyface assassin?" He said, "Yeah, what about him? What about LeBron James?" And that's where he went.
Well, LeBron, I mean, that was heroism and leadership. I mean, what I wanted to ask you about is if you could go back to a time when, well, I guess, could you go back to the time of Malcolm X's assassination or Martin Luther King's assassination, something that really hit you in the gut? Because the bottom line is this: I voted yesterday for Hillary Clinton, but I didn't vote for Hillary. I voted for Barack Obama. At 38 years old, I started my show 5 years ago because I was astounded by the treatment, the lack of respect. This was when his first term was going on, at how he was being treated. Eventually, it morphed into this whole thing of interviewing musicians because you cats actually tell the truth. But can you talk about going back to a time where it was a socioeconomic, sociopolitical, devastating time for you and or your people, and ultimately how you persevered?
Well, Jake, Max Roach asked me a long time ago, right before Malcolm was assassinated, to go to the musicians union to protest the way that what do they call them, casuals were distributed at the union. It was unfair. Black guys didn't get the casuals. They usually send white guys out to the casuals, which paid more than any nightclub you could play in at that time. So we didn't get those gigs. So Max Roach, he formed a committee, a group of young musicians to go to the union and protest the way that they distributed these casuals, they called them. I call them casualties because that's what they were. We played in Jewish weddings and stuff like that, stuff we had nothing to do with. So anyhow, I went down to the union with him, and he told me, I said, Max, me coming down here, I hope this doesn't hurt my recording invitations, to record with people around New York. And he told me, he said, look, man, those records don't mean nothing. This means more to us. If we can get these casual things for some of us, we can increase our income, like about 50, 60%, because what we were doing was playing in these restaurants and bars around New York. And now and then a record session, and record sessions only pay the union scale, which is about $58 or something like that. So anyhow, I went out there with these young people, several of them. We all went out to the union and we protested, and now they distribute the casuals among members of the union, and they don't have to be a specific race, so they give them to anybody who's available at the time. So it changed that law. Another time, let me tell you another law that I experienced.
Before you go on, so you're the macro point you're making is that be proactive and in this case advocate for your people. Is that right? I mean,
I was doing it. I was doing it for the sake of jazz musicians in New York that weren't getting a fair cut at the casuals.
Go ahead, continue.
So anyhow, the next one was, I think it was Malcolm X. No, Frank Sinatra was the next one at the Copacabana. This was during the police card era. Remember? Well, I don't know if you remember how young you are, but during one time there was a period in New York when you had to have a police card to perform in anywhere where there was alcohol sold. So that cut, and if you had like a traffic violation or any kind of misdemeanor, it would take away your privilege to have a police card. They wouldn't give you one. So that was another way of eliminating people. You know, if you had a little problem with child support or any kind of anything with the police department, they would take you out of having a police card, so you couldn't play. So Frank Sinatra was opening at the Copa, and he had a couple of guys in his band, and I don't know what nationality they were, whether they were black guys or white guys, I don't know. But at the time, there was a couple of guys in the band that didn't have police cards. So the guy from the union came in, and he asked to see their union cards, and they had union cards, but they didn't have cabaret license, they called them. And so the union man said, okay, these guys, whoever these people are, I don't know how many it was, said that they cannot perform here. So Frank Sinatra said, all right, guys, pack up, we're out of here. And this is at the Copacabana, man, and the management went nuts. You know, oh, my God, you can't do that. Frank Sinatra's advertised, and he was a big name, you know, and all this. You cannot do this. So he said, these guys are not going to play here. So Frank said, if whoever these guys were that couldn't play, he said, pack up, all of you guys, pack up, we're not playing here at all. And that was the end of the police cabaret license era.
Wow. That's a mind-blowing story.
Yeah, Sinatra, he ended that, or he started it, a movement to end it. I don't know if it ended right then, but he did open. And they did play there without the cabaret license. But, you know, there was a card, man, a little card with your picture on it. It looked like a driver's license. And if you had any kind of run-in with police, traffic tickets, anything, they would deny you that card.
That's right. No, I'm actually producing a film documentary on Stan Getz, and he had some serious legal issues and could not play in New York. He could not get a cabaret card.
Yeah, so Stan had a little run-in at a drugstore in Philadelphia,
Seattle.
Seattle. Was it? Yeah. Yeah, he was accused of robbery or something.
Oh no, he went in with his finger in his pocket and tried to take the pharmaceuticals out and wound up in a jail. Tried to kill him. Actually, tried to kill himself. But I mean, Tootie, so great to talk to you, man. My question is, really, I mean, can you talk? It's going to get heavy, but I just want to ask you about the first time that you played in Africa, and ultimately that's the motherland. I think it's very important to talk to people. I interviewed Ahmad Jamal earlier this year. The first universities came out of Africa. So many inventions came out of Africa. It never gets talked about. And now we have a situation where you really have cats that are fully engaged in relitigating, not even litigating, fighting the Civil War again. I just would like you to talk about the motherland of Africa, how it affected you when you first went to play there.
Well, my first time to play in Africa was, maybe 10 years ago, maybe a little longer. But I was invited with 3 other drummers. Was Ben Riley, Leroy Williams, and Jackie Williams. and myself. So the four of us. I had a group called the Whole Drum Truth, which I still have it. We just performed in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and we also performed at the Kennedy Center for my brother's 90th birthday tribute. Also, so when I went to Africa, maybe it was 10 years ago, probably.
So, but even before that, were you aware, like when, I don't know, cats like from your generation, Bobby Hutcherson was going over there and Joe Chan, they were going to Northern Africa though. Like
Yeah, I never had that opportunity. You know, the first time I went to Africa was with Northern Africa was with Yusuf Latif, and that was to go to a mosque with him because he wanted me to see the procedure at a mosque in where it was a Muslim country, you know.
Sure.
So we went. It was Kenny Barron and Bob Cunningham and myself. We were performing in Italy at the time. So Yusuf paid our airfare, and we went over to Tunisia. And when we got over there, it was like early in the daytime, so we went to bed, and we woke up like around 4 o'clock in the morning. He woke us up and took us to this mosque, and we witnessed this ceremony of these Muslim guys praying, and it was one most beautiful thing I've ever seen because it was open, no roof on the ceiling, no ceiling on the building, so you could look up at the sky, and the stars were all over the place, and these old brothers were reciting the Quran, and when one would fall over and go to sleep, then another one would take over, so they would do this around the clock. But anyhow, that was my first time I'd ever gone to Africa. The second time was when I went to South Africa with the drum group, and we went to Cape Town, to the Cape Town Jazz Festival, and that was quite an experience.
I'm curious because bringing back Stan Getz in the 70s, he went to South Africa, Johannesburg, with a band, and he was told that he would definitely get a chance to play in front of a full audience, no segregation, nothing like it. And he got there, and the audience was all white, and he finished his set, took his band, and they went down to a local gym or a local place of little hangout and played with some of the local cats. Apartheid is still alive and well in South Africa?
No, it's over. You know, when Nelson Mandela got out of prison.
Is it really over, though?
Well, you know what I mean. It's over. As far as we know, it's over, but it's still the people who are suffering are still suffering there because of poverty and the Dutch who moved in and took over. They own most of the properties, and people still live in shanty towns and sleeping in boxes and stuff like that. It's pretty bad.
You know, we were Mtume and I had just a glorifying, wonderful interview over the weekend, and I wanted to read you a quote that he talked about and then get your response. He said, you know, he's talking about John Coltrane records. He said, sometimes I listen to some of those records and I say, wait a minute, I know you don't know where you're at. And he's talking about Elvin Jones, and Elvin would be like, bap-a-doo bap, and it would be right on the one. And you're playing through rhythms. You're playing through time signatures. Was this something that was, can you talk about that musical concept and when you started, when that became very clear to you about playing through the rhythms?
Well, you know, I never became very comfortable with doing that. Like, it was basically an Elvin Jones style of playing, and he kind of created it himself. And in those days, you didn't really try to do something that somebody else was doing.
Right.
That was so difficult. I mean, you would pick something easy, like Art Blakey. I consider that easier, you know, to swing, and Philly Joe had definite rhythms that you could imitate. But Elvin stuff, I kind of left that alone, man, because it was so unique. And he was so special, and he doesn't get credit for it much now, but most drummers today play some Elvin Jones. Most of them do. They don't even know where it came from, but they play it. There's a lot of Elvin Jones imitators out here nowadays.
What do you say to cats that, you know, that either come to get advice from you. Mtume also talked about academia. I mean, the Jake Feinberg show is a perfect example of just being a street scholar, sort of finding my voice on the air after 500 guests, being able to talk to cats like your brother, you know, and Mtume and Kenny Barron and Billy Cobham and all these cats. But, you know, now you go to academia and you learn, you transcribe Elvin Jones solos, or you learn John Coltrane solos. And what does that really tell you about the
Well, you know what?
Yeah.
Let me tell you this, Jake.
Uh,
Lester Young said years ago, I had the pleasure of being in his company and playing with him a lot around Philadelphia. And he said one time they were interviewing him, and they asked him, what did he think about the new young saxophone players? Or not necessarily saxophone, but young musicians. He said, well, you know, they all come out of schools, and he said they all have the same teacher, so they all sound the same. So, you know, when you think about what he was saying, they don't all have the same teacher, but we're teaching the young people the same things. We're teaching them sequences, and we don't teach them nothing about the music coming from your heart and feeling a rhythm from your heart, and not something that's on paper or something that's taught that way, because that was not available to me in my generation. You know, university wasn't even happening. We couldn't even go in a university at that time. But this is what he was saying. He said they all sound the same. And what he meant, I think, is that there was nobody out here that was imitating Lester Young or Coleman Hawkins or Ben Webster or those guys. Number one, they were kept quiet most of the times. They weren't recording as much as other people, so you didn't really hear them. So it was hard to imitate something that you couldn't hear.
I know you're nailing this. Back in the Mtume said it. He goes, the bottom line is today individuality is not taught. Back in the day, that was not only taught, that was required. So can you relay a story from your early career when you yourself was, you know, you were, okay, you know, Elvin was doing his thing. You considered Blakey's stuff, quote unquote, simple, but I'm trying to get to the Tootie Heath. When did you find your voice? Can you talk about a certain point when you were like, I got my own sound?
Well, I still don't feel like I have my own sound today. I mean, you know, I still play a lot of stuff that has gone before me. I'm kind of like an imitator. I might be a better imitator than most people because I was there and I could see the guys and
right.
be with them. So anyhow, I'm with some young drummers right now, and when I play things that I learned from Philly Joe or Max Roach, or, you know, they had never heard these things. If they weren't recorded, they don't know about it. So, you know, what I always say is that music in my era it came from the heart, and now it's coming from the head. You know, it's academic now. It's nothing's coming from the heart, and the heart was where we got everything from. You know, my first playing was R&B. I didn't know anything about jazz until later on in my life. So R&B gave me a background and some rhythms that were not applied in jazz. It was considered not something you just didn't do. So now you can play all of that stuff now. It's all okay because it's all very popular on television, not necessarily R&B, but the hip-hop movement came out of the R&B movement. You know, it didn't come from jazz. It came out of the R&B movement. So that's available now for young people to learn how to play this stuff and then apply it to jazz. But where with me, it was the R&B stuff was the most important music that I had ever heard, you know, because it was available, and I got a chance to play with a few people around Philadelphia that played R&B. A guy named Junior Waters.
Wow. Wait, Junior Walker, Junior Waters?
Junior Waters. He used to play piano, stand up and play piano, which was the damnest thing I had ever seen in my life. Is he's the only person I know that would stand up and play. And I used to play around in Wildwood, New Jersey at clubs, because over there they didn't ask you how old you were, and I was under 18, you know, so I could sneak in there and play. But in Philadelphia, it was more difficult.
I mean, this is totally revelatory stuff. I mean, you were, just for the record, we're talking to Albert Tootie Heath, born May 31st, 1935, that
Correct.
essentially during the Depression and before World War II. But I want to be very clear about something. I mean, were you getting off on Dyke and the Blazers and Hank Ballard and the Midnighters? What kind of R&B are you actually talking about? Was it because
I'm talking about a guy called Bull Moose Jackson. You ever hear of him?
oh my, please talk about Bull Moose. I have this is because I mean I got to believe you were 18. This is like early 50s.
Yeah, I was maybe younger than that. I played with Bull Moose a little bit around Philadelphia.
Bull
I couldn't have
Moose.
been more than 16, 17 years old. And he used to come to Philadelphia. I played with Lynn Hope. You ever hear of him?
Keep going, man. This is I'm
Yeah.
totally
Oh, yeah, all these guys are gone now. And a guy that we really loved was a guy named Screamin' Jay Hawkins, where I never had the opportunity to play with him. But he had theater way before anybody would attempt some of the things he did, like have a casket in the club and lay down in the casket and sing, "I'm going to put a spell on you," in a nightclub, and people would run out the joint because he would scare everybody to death because he would be dressed like he's dead, and then he would come up out of this casket and start singing "I'll Put a Spell on You," which was one of his major hits during the time.
Can you
So
talk? Yeah, I mean,
I'm trying to think of who else.
Yeah.
There was another guy named Louis Judge around Philadelphia. That Jimmy Garrison was the bass player.
really?
And
Are you?
yeah.
Wow.
Jimmy Garrison came from Florida, and he came to Philadelphia, and we connected right away. When he came to our house to visit me, he saw Percy one day playing the bass, and he said, "Oh man, that's what I want to do." So Percy kind of took him under his wing, and he loved Percy until he died. Man, he was Percy's man. Percy loved Jimmy Garrison too, and Jimmy was in this band with me. Jimmy was really a doo-wop singer when he came to Philadelphia, and he switched over to playing the bass. And we were in a band together with a guy named Louis Judge. We became Muhammad Abibullah later in life. But we played in his band around Philadelphia, New Jersey, and surrounding Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And I'm trying to think of there was a guy, I forgot his name. I can't think of it right at this moment.
Well,
but
no,
he never.
This is fascinating stuff because I mean, this is so for the audience out there. I mean, you're talking about the language swing going into bebop, and here Tootie Heath is off playing R&B.
Yeah, shuffles and rock and roll type. Yeah.
So I mean, were you listening? I'm curious about. Is that where you learned to play a great shuffle?
Yeah, that's where I learned to play the shuffle. And we don't use it too much in jazz today, except Percy had a song that he wrote called what was it called now? Oh, he did this thing called the Watergate Blues, and I used to play the shuffle rhythm on that because it required a shuffle rhythm. But the shuffle came from my early days playing the drums, before I got to the jazz stuff, which was supposed to be hip, and it did not use the shuffle rhythm. Other than Duke Ellington and people like that, they could get away with it. The big bands, they could do it.
Yeah.
But for me to play on gigs around, Philadelphia with people, I couldn't do a shuffle. They weren't having that in those days.
I mean, can you explain to me? There's something infectious about the Fats Domino, that time feel, that shuffle in the jazz. In my mind, when I listen to contemporary jazz, which I don't do a lot of, but when I do, I don't hear a lot of blues at all. It's been almost classicalized.
That's right. They don't use it too much.
Why don't
in
they?
jazz.
Why? How did it get to? I'm not saying it was premeditated, but how did we move away from that?
Well, we became more intellectual. The older the music got, the more it came out of the universities, and they don't teach that type of playing in the universities. They teach other types of playing that has nothing to do with shuffle or the blues or the rock and roll, which they ignore that as well. Because rock and roll was considered white people's blues, It wasn't considered ours, so we had our own way of playing the blues, which was basically a 12-bar blues, sometimes 8, depending on who you played with. But that was not taught blues was not taught. It's not taught today. You know, a pentatonic scale is something that every jazz musician would really avoid usually.
Well, okay, so just for the record, I've talked to Hubert Eves and other cats who grew up and you yourself that you had race records, and then it went to R&B, and then the story that I'm told is that Elvis on the radio was singing, and they all thought he was black, so they called it rhythm and blues. But when they found out he was white, they changed it to rock.
Yeah.
I mean, is that really? Is that how it went down? I mean,
I don't really know how it went down, but all of a sudden, here comes this stuff called rock, which I thought was just like blues, except it was not black guys that were playing it. So that came about during my era, during my beginning of playing. So and then it got all of this attention with the media and the recording industry, and then it got bigger and bigger and bigger till now. You got guys that just break instruments over the floor, and you take a guitar and bust it up, and that's considered music, So it's gone totally into some theatrical stuff now as opposed to being just instrumental music.
I mean, Tootie, you were being extremely humble before talking about how you were able to see cats, and you are a good imitator. But I'm just going to read off some names here: George Russell in '65,
Yeah.
Sonny Red, Cecil Payne, Mal Waldron, Blue Mitchell, Ronnie Matthews. This Clifford Jordan. I mean, to me, this was spiritual music, man. I mean,
I think so. I think so too.
Did you close your eyes a lot when you play? I'm just curious because, like,
I did not know because I had to see what was going on, and plus I needed to see who was directing or who was the composer, because they have specific dynamics that they want you to use, and it's not necessarily on paper. So you have to keep your eyes open and try to make sure you are in tune with what's going on around you.
Can you talk about a leader that you worked under and the kind of the nonverbal communication they had and how it flowed, especially if you were in where you were stretching out and you needed to determine dynamics? I'm fascinated. I mean,
yeah, you mentioned George Russell. That was one of the really adventurous, more in my playing. I could be as adventurous as I wanted to be with George's music. George Russell was a drummer originally. That I think he had tuberculosis, and they told him he didn't need to be playing drums. It would exert too much energy, and his breathing was strange. So he played the piano instead, and then he started to write music. And so I was in his group, but his music allowed me to be as free as I possibly wanted to be, and I was influenced, of course, by the free movement, which Dexter always would say he didn't play free jazz because you didn't get paid for that. That's what Dexter used to say.
Dexter Gordon?
Yeah, he used to always say that's free jazz.
It's
that you don't get paid for that.
It's free jazz.
Yeah, he said you don't get paid for that. He said I play the other kind that you get paid for.
I mean, was there? Can you, as best you can? I mean, I'm looking back here. How did you get your Swahili name?
Mtume.
Mtume gave you your name.
Yeah, he gave. Mtume named me and his whole family, and Mtume was a very strong member of the US organization at the time, which is in Los Angeles, and they were trying to learn Swahili as a language that we had abandoned, as our own way of communicating. So he said, so it was necessary for us to learn some African language, which was Swahili. So he named me, his whole family, right now, today, all his kids, his grandkids, his wife, and he named Herbie Hancock, by the way, his name. That's where the Mwandishi came from.
He named him Mwandishi?
That's where it came from Mtume. Yeah.
And you're
It means composer.
And you're Kumba.
Yeah, Kumba means creativity, and he always thought that I was very creative, so he gave me that name. And the names always suited the person, whoever you are. The names would have something to do with your personality.
So, can you intermesh that with this idea of like this album here called Kawaida? I believe.
Kawaida.
Kawaida. That is, I believe
that's Swahili as well.
Now that was your first album as a leader,
and that was influenced by Mtume at the time.
Tell me about the rhythms, because for the audience, we had Buster Williams, who could just lock a groove, but also take it way out on bass. You had Herbie as a percussive pianist, and then you had Tootie on drums. And you had Mtume, and then I'm not going to overlook this cat, Ed Blackwell, playing percussion.
Yeah, Blackwell was on it too.
So I mean,
hold on just a minute. Hold on a minute.
Sure. Talking to Albert Heath here a day after American presidential election, and just an honor to be able to connect with this cat, because he's been through it all and started playing R&B in the early 50s before he even got into bebop, which is just astounding. Are you back with us? Well, he's still with us here. So 1969 at the Universe recording engineer at the Universe, Ed Blackwell, Mtume, Albert Tootie Heath, Buster Williams, Herbie Hancock, Jimmy Heath, Don Cherry. An unbelievable lineup, and just very, very spiritual type music going on, which is, part of his pedigree here.
Okay, Jake. Somebody was at the door I had to attend to.
No problem, man. I wanted you to talk, if you could, as best you can, conceptually, the album, how you incorporated, for instance, are you keeping time, and where did Mtume and Blackwell come in order to create extra rhythms? I mean, I'm fascinated with this period of time, and I wanted you to talk about, as the leader, how you assimilated all that percussion, including Herbie and Buster.
Well, Herbie and Buster were like students of the movement at the time, so they cooperated. And Herbie actually abandoned that name for a long time. And now, I just played with him a couple of weeks ago. Herbie finally started to acknowledge the name, because it was kind of related to the injustice stuff that was going on in our society. And so Herbie didn't really want to participate in that, and neither did Buster Williams. Both of those guys became Buddhists.
Right. I ran into a cat who goes to the same Buddhist temple that they do.
Right. So Buddhists and that nationalism, there was a conflict there. So Herbie, although Mtume gave him that name. See, I was in the group at that time in Herbie's band. It was Buster, and he kind of named everybody in the band. Mchezazi was Buster. Kitu was Joe Henderson, and none of these guys kept that name because they didn't really have too much to do with this movement of us identifying with Africa and all of that. Herbie didn't pay much attention to that, so he went on and became a Buddhist. And this is like, in the 60s. And he's been a Buddhist ever since. And Buster is too. And I understand now Wayne Shorter is as well. So,
I mean, in truth, these names very much stuck with Herbie through the early to mid 70s. I mean, he kept that. He had that M1 Dishi band.
Well, that came in the 70s. But, I don't know if Herbie named that band that, or I don't know how that happened. But I know Mtume named Herbie M1Dishi, when I was in the band, and then the whole band got to be called M1Dishi, and I don't really know anything about how that happened.
It's fascinating. I mean, as best you can. I mean, I opened the show talking about my fear of white nationalism growing in this country, but you're talking about black nationalism.
Black nationalism.
Let's
Correct.
talk very. Buster and Herbie, like you said, they capitulated. They went along with it. You said, I love that line. Curtis Fuller, yourself. What was that?
No, Curtis wasn't in that group. Garnett Brown was in that group. He had a name too, which I don't remember because he abandoned it immediately. We never called him by his Swahili
right,
name.
that was the Fat Albert Rotunda group. But
Right.
I'm curious about. I would like you to talk about, from your point of view, the musical expression of that movement. I think it gets characterized as militant and violent, and it was not. And I just wanted you to talk about, from your point of view, what that movement was about and how the music was expressing your feelings.
I thought it was very spiritual, and it expressed the times. We had a lot of violence during that time. You know, like the Black Panthers were around, and they were being harassed and killed by the police, and we had a lot of violence in the society. So some of that music that I did in that Kawaida album kind of represented some of that violence, and it was peaceful as well. So both sides of what was going on at that time was represented in that album. That's why it never sold any appreciable amount.
Is that
it was not a hit? It was not a hit for sure.
Was there any radio play for it at all?
I don't think so because Mtume was reciting a lot of the ideology poetry from Maulana Karinga, who was the founder of this organization called US, and Mtume was a significant member of this organization, and Mtume was really a spokesperson for that organization. Because if you know anything about this guy, when he decided to be a part of something, he was 100% totally involved.
Well, this is Maulana
Karinga, yeah.
Now, what was he essentially? Could you, what was his poetry speaking towards? The idea of
it was basically about the principles of the organization, US. It was the 7 principles, which was, I can't remember them now because I've gotten away from that so long away. But I think if you had spoken to Mtume about that, he would be able to refresh you on.
Well, we're going to do part 2, so we're going to be able to vet that. This cat is just.
You're going to get back to him and ask him some questions about us, and he'd be glad to talk to you about it.
All right. Well, we got a game on this program called Name That Tune, and I want to put in this piece of music for you, and then come back and break it down.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Jake Feinberg Show brought to you by the Stereo Hospital, the Circle Tree Ranch, and Abbott Taylor Jewelers, and we thank them for their support. What do you got for us, Albert?
Just Friends is the name of the song.
Yeah, you know what's funny? I really was excited to put this in, and it on YouTube here. It's called Wazuri Blues, but that's not.
That's what they call the song.
I was going to say I was waiting for some sort of edgy, burning, soaring stuff. Like I played for.
No, that's Just Friends is what they were playing. I don't know what they called it.
I love it. Okay, so that was off Kwanzaa, the first. Jimmy.
Are you serious?
Yeah, I mean, if you give me your email, I'll send you. They have mistitled it says Wazuri Blues, and that's the farthest thing from a blues.
But I don't remember ever recording with a guitar like that.
That was Ted Dunbar. I'm looking at the album.
It was. I was getting ready to say. Okay, I was getting ready to say it was not Wes Montgomery. So I do remember Ted making a recording with Ted, and I really liked Ted.
You talk about what you liked about his playing in particular. He was an amazing guitarist.
Ted was a numerologist, so anything around numbers, he could always add some history to whatever the numbers were, like your birth date or your mailing address or whatever numbers. Anything had to do with numbers. He had the history of numbers.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, when I hear you playing, you're subdividing a lot, and I kind of wanted you to talk about, I like talking to the cats about the idea that any note can be the one. I mean, ultimately, when you're in a group setting, if everybody understands that any note can be the one, then you can really stretch the music out. And I wanted you to talk about your philosophy as it relates to that, in that everything today, everyone's very, very much fixed on wanting to know where the one is, making sure that the groove is there. But at the same time, the idea that, you know, in order to really stretch out, any note can be the one. I just kind of wanted you to riff on that.
You know, I don't know anything about that particular concept, because we always knew where one was when we played, you know, because that's how you begin and end something. You got to know where it is. Otherwise, it's chaos. You know, if you don't know where, nobody knows where it starts or where it ends. You know, it's not what. Let me see. It's a title for it. It's not. I'll say it's not contemporary jazz. Old time jazz, you knew exactly where everything was at all times. That's why it made it stand out a little different from contemporary music, where you don't know where one is. I mean, when you say you don't know where it is, everybody knows where one is when you're playing. If you're a group of musicians, you have to know where one is, because you can't begin or end nothing. It has no ending to it if you don't have a structure.
Right, but I mean, if you're off in an improvisational jam and you get lost, you know that if you're in a group that understands where the one is, any note can be the one.
Well, no, that's not true, because you have structure. So you have chord patterns, you have structure. You know when there's a chorus, you know when there's 8 bars, you know when there's 12 bars, whatever the structure is of the song. So you have to know where these points are in order to create and be creative. You know, like Barry Harris always says, you can't be out unless you know in. So
right,
right.
No, you have to. You can't go out until you know the end. That's.
You got to know in, so you got to know where the one is to play. I mean, how can you start something and end something if you don't have a one?
Yeah, I guess what I'm just getting at is improvisation, when you really don't know what's going to come out of your instrument and you're in the middle of a 17 or 20.
That's a different story, and that's like you said, that word improvisation. You know, I mean, that takes it out of what I'm. You know, there's parts of the music that I play that is improvised, but most of it is very structured. It has a specific, and even to improvise, you got to know the structure and the form of the song or the tune or whatever you want to call it. So you have to have some point of reference somewhere, and that way everybody can follow you. I mean, everybody that's playing with you can follow you. But if you just don't have a one or anything like that, then you playing some, Ornette Coleman's music didn't necessarily have a one that you could identify. But I love his music, by the way, but it was so different, and it had nothing to do with what we were trying to play at that time. But it was so different for him to have the audacity to play without chord structure and all the form that I learned. For him to stand up and play without that was kind of unique, and I really loved it.
You loved it. I mean, did you talk to Blackwell about how a drummer
I did all the time. Blackwell was an excellent musician as well as a drummer. He could play on this music, and he played on. Actually, Blackwell used to play melodies on the drums, and if you're familiar with his playing, he had certain things that he would play that were that you could identify with New Orleans and the march stuff and the parade. You know, in New Orleans, he could always stick that in anywhere in a piece, and you wouldn't even know it. You wouldn't even know you've been had. It's actually, yeah, you wouldn't even know you've been had.
Melodies on the drums, man. I mean, you have no idea how influential that was to the rock movement. Well,
it came from Max Roach. He was the most melodic drummer of my time, and Blackwell was a student of Max Roach and a disciple of Max Roach as well. Plus, he had his own New Orleans taste and things that he would play that were quite different. Like Vernal Fournier was the same.
Vernal Fournier.
All those guys from New Orleans had a kind of a different approach.
Earl Palmer, who eventually became a great studio.
Earl Palmer, right?
Palmer, also James Black, I think, played with him.
Oh, James Black was a very serious drummer.
Monster drummer. I mean, Ellis Marsalis talked about him a lot.
Idris Muhammad too.
You would you? I mean, Tootie, would you talk to him and did you admire it, or did you actually try to incorporate some of it into your own music?
I always try to incorporate everything that I hear and see in the music. That's why your music should express the times. Your art should express the times, you know. So whatever's going on in this world, you can identify with it, and if you're astute enough, you can apply it to your improvisation. So I often play Blackwell's. I have a piece that I call Ed Blackwell, which is a thing that he used to play all the time that he showed Don Cherry. And Don Cherry and I lived in Sweden for about 8 or 9 years together. And Don showed me this because he learned it from Blackwell. And I've been playing it ever since. I mean, it's something that he passed on to me. And he said, you know, Blackwell used to play this all. And it's something that I really love to hear Blackwell do. And he was so special. There's a song called, Ornette has a song, if you get a chance, called Ramblin'. Listen to it if you get a chance.
Ramblin'.
Yeah, and that's where Blackwell plays some serious New Orleans drums on there.
Wow, I love you.
Yeah, Ramblin', yeah.
Can you just talk about, you guys as brothers, Percy, Jimmy, and yourself, I mean, it's one of the greatest lineages, it's up alongside the Montgomery brothers and other cats like that. And I mean, can you talk about Percy?
Yeah, I'm going to tell you this about Percy. Percy, I lived with Percy when I first got to New York. I lived in his house for maybe 3 years or so with him and his wife, June, who just passed away a few months ago at 90 years old. But Percy, I used to, kind of babysit his kids while he was out on the road with the Modern Jazz Quartet. And, of course, it was in Queens, and I would, Percy came home one time after he had made it look like a West Coast tour or something, and he was all excited about these young guys he heard playing in L.A., and it was Ornette and Don Cherry and Billy Higgins.
Wow.
And he heard these guys playing. And he was excited, and he loved these guys, so they had him on the recording. He's on a recording with Ornette. So he used to always talk about Ornette all the time. And Percy is a real Charlie Parker fan, and for him to like Ornette was so out of it, because Ornette, he abandoned all the rules that Charlie Parker had set forth, So all the alto players wanted to be Charlie Parker, but Ornette had his own way of playing. And Percy introduced me to Ornette, and from that day, Ornette used to be playing at a club called the Fire Spot in New York, and I used to go sit in there and listen to them every night, or as many nights as I could. Once I moved away from Percy's house, I moved into Manhattan, which was very close to the Fire Spot at that time. So I was in there quite a bit, and people were sneaking in there listening to him without them knowing it. I saw Coltrane in there quite a few times, but Coltrane was not sneaking. He was really interested in the music. Sonny Rollins would be in the phone booth with the door cracked to keep the light from coming on. In those days, the light would come on when you go in the phone booth.
Sure.
And you could see who was in there, but he used to have his foot in the crack in the door, and he'd be in there because he wanted to hear what they were doing. And I'm telling you, it was so unique what they were playing at the time, and so different from what we were trying to play. We were trying to be Max Roach and Art Blakey and Philly Joe and people like that. And here these guys, they came along, and Higgins was always swinging, so his stuff was it would go with any kind of music. But Blackwell was unique because Blackwell actually played Ornette's music and Billy Higgins kind of just did what he does. He swung and had a great feeling through everything. But Blackwell kind of added something that was unique to Ornette's music, I thought. And I used to go in and listen to these guys. Plus, I lived close to Blackwell. We lived down there on the Lower East Side. And at the time, later on in his life, he was on the dialysis thing, and I used to take him to the hospital.
Did you go to Yuma Sultan's artistic communal thing that was on the East Side?
I don't think so. I don't remember that name.
Well, Yuma Sultan was played with Archie Shepp and percussionist. But the very simple question here: how, when you're playing something completely new, like Mtume just waxed poetic so brilliantly about academia now, it's tracing paper music. You're playing John Coltrane solos, you're transcribing Elvin Jones solos, and you're playing like somebody else. And yet, when you're trying to create something new in music in today's world, it's not commodified, so you can't take chances, and there's more conformity. But how did Ornette wind up having? How was there any commercial appeal for his music? I mean, the pressings are there. Atlantic pressed his records. He made records. He made money off that.
But there was a small audience that liked Ornette's music, like any artist that it could be any genre. You could be a painter, and if your paintings were exciting enough, you could get somebody to buy them. So with the record companies, Ornette may have been selling records, but he wasn't, was no smash hits. He was no Stevie Wonder sales or Michael Jackson, or if you want to compare it to a jazz person that's selling records, Oliver Nelson, say, he sold a lot of records. But Ornette's music was not that accessible for sales, but certain people loved Ornette. He had an audience. It was a small audience, but he had an audience that liked what he was doing because it was kind of revolutionary. It was so different from everybody else because he didn't follow the same rules. He didn't have the same rules. Like one time a guy told him he played out of tune, and Ornette said, "This is my horn, and all these notes on it are good. I paid for this horn myself, so every note I play on this horn is good, it's fine. So I don't know what you're talking about. Something's wrong with their ears." He said, my horn is not. So that was his approach. His approach was very different.
What was the feeling like to play with your brother and Mtume back at Lincoln Center a couple weeks ago? I mean, you've been doing it for so long, but I mean, now that we're living in this certain time when jazz was, and that's the other part about Ornette, is that jazz was popular music back then, and people were willing to experiment, and then as a result, the industry took chances on them as well. But with jazz sort of in this now being a world music, and with competition being fierce all over the globe, and so many more cats that can play it, what is the feeling like to play with your brother and Mtume on the bandstand in 2016?
Well, number one, Mtume doesn't play anymore. He hasn't played in years.
I thought he was going to sit in with you, though, or so. I don't know. I heard that.
No, he stopped playing years ago.
Right.
After Miles Davis, that was it for him.
In '97, he retired after scoring the New York Undercover.
Yeah, he quit playing, yeah. So he was not playing, but he was there, and he said some beautiful words for his father, and he helped announce the program and so forth, but he did not play anything. But I did play with, and Jimmy, I don't remember playing with Jimmy either, but I was in a small group where he sat on the bandstand and didn't play, but he sat there while we played a couple of his compositions. And then he had a big band, and then the big band played. And I was not in the big band. There's a young man named Evan Sherman played the drums with his big band. He rehearses, and he lives in New York, and he's there with Jimmy and the big band.
Yeah, actually, I caught a picture of him and you in the dressing room, Evan Sherman.
Oh, what a wonderful young man, and a great drummer he is. And, because I know Jimmy's music, and because I've been hearing it most of my life. And even some of that big band music I have played back when Percy and I used to play in Jimmy's big band. And Percy never really liked it too much, and neither do I. But, I did it because it was Jimmy and Jimmy's music. But I prefer a small group. And but anyhow, I didn't play with Jimmy on his 90th birthday, whatever celebration. He was sitting there, but he didn't play anything. But we played his music, and Herbie played the piano. Hancock and a young woman from Argentina, I don't remember her name, and Terrell Stafford played the trumpet, and John Lee played the bass, and that was the group that I played with Jimmy's stuff. And Washington, let's see, Lincoln Center, I played with Stanley Cowell on piano, and then when we got to Washington, D.C., I played with Herbie Hancock on piano. So Jimmy, I never did play with Jimmy in his celebration, but I was there.
Were you this is a little bit. You're a little bit earlier than like James Gadsden was a monster doo-wop fan, and he was playing with Hank Ballard and the Midnighters, and they would be on tour. And before Ballard's set, Gadsden would go on with the rhythm section and the horns, and they would be playing spiritual music for the first set, and then the second set they'd play more R&B. Did you have opportunities when you were in the R&B settings to open up and play bebop music on your own? I mean, how did you learn? How did you get into the bebop scene? Because you were doing R&B.
Yeah, I learned playing R&B, but I learned to play swing jazz as well at the same time, because the more you know how to do, the more music, the more genres you could do, the more you would get calls to do these things for your survival. So the competition was very fierce competition, and you had to. The more you knew how to play in different genres, the more you would be called and get recordings and concerts and so forth.
I guess what I'm trying to get at is, like, because you played with Train. I mean, were you guys were still playing bebop in '57? Is that right?
Well, yeah, I guess you could call it that. I thought it was kind of Coltrane's own music. I wouldn't call it bebop. I mean, you could. Bebop was something that happened with Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie, and Coltrane definitely didn't play that.
No, and I'm not even sure. I think you would know better than anybody, but I'm not even sure if Bird or Diz even thought that was an appropriate name for the music.
No, they didn't. They didn't name it that.
Yeah, they just called it new music. It was like
they just called it music. Like Yusuf Lateef wouldn't allow you to call his music jazz because he didn't like the title. It implied something that he did not believe in. So he called his music. What do you call it? He had a title. He would call it no. What do you call it?
I'll have to look it up. That's
psychic music. He called it physical something psychic music. It was a long term he used to use.
Yeah, I think he named an album after it too.
Yeah. Yusuf was a student of philosophy, so he has some terms and terminology, things and labels that most people didn't use. So I think he called it physical psychic music, something like that.
Yeah, I'm looking it up right now. That to me is just going back to the African the prayer. I mean
let me say this, Jake.
Go ahead.
I think the name bebop came from the industry to sell the music. They had to put some kind of title on it. So they named it bebop. Musicians never call themselves a bebop musician. You call yourself a musician. That's that.
Sure. No, I mean, when you talk about Max and Bartz and Yusef and I mean, none of these guys wanted to be put in that box. Mingus music.
No.
It was called Mingus music. I mean,
that's right.
Were they feeling dubious about the fact that you had a generally a white industry, white
Right.
moneymakers.
Well, you know, the
label-
record companies kind of labeled it, you know, so they could sell it, just like, you know, to destroy people. They call us Negroes, you know what I mean? Then black, then colored. Now, I mean, we're all kinds of shit. We're just Africans, man. African Americans. That's all we are, you know. But they call us all kind of, you know, names: black, colored, Negroes. I mean, so it's the same with anything you want to sell or destroy. You give it a title.
This is so therapeutic, Tootie. I mean, as we wrap, can we do set 2 in the next couple of weeks? I would love to do one more set with you.
I would love to talk with you. I can have him to me on the other line too.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if we can do a 3-way, but M2 and
okay.
we had a ball. I mean, he said to me at the end of our conversation, he goes, "It was the most fun interview I've ever done, and I don't do interviews." So
He doesn't. He did one out here for me at with a young man that I played drum. I studied drums with out here, a man named John Trinicosta. He has a radio show, and I asked him to me to do it on his show, and he did it here, and it was over the phone type.
Yeah,
So,
no, we just did a phoner last week, and we had such a ball. But
Yeah.
just before I let you go, please, can you tell me why you are proud of Barack Obama?
historically, you know, for him to be elected as president, it said something about the country, and now it goes back to the reality of the country. So it kind of gave us a little hope that, you know, hey, things are kind of turning around a little bit. But after he was elected, man, these haters came out, you know, Tea Parties and all of these names of these people who just changed from haters to Tea Party. You know, these names of these people that hate other people, and especially people of African American descent. They don't, you know, they feel threatened, and it's a terrible thing. But Barack made us proud for a minute, but then he can't change the world. He did a lot, but he couldn't. He's not able to change the world and change the attitudes of these people in this country. So it's always going to be some haters in this country, you know, for some reason or other. We're historically hated, so that's that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of
Jews
self-hate.
Jews too. They hate the Jew too. They hate the Jew too.
Oh, they don't. You know, I mean, there's a self-loathing, and I just, you know, I talked to your brother. He talked about, I think it was in North Carolina, when he was.
Yeah.
And he would walk down the street and just keep his head down, and you know, you get these racial episodes. It was very overt. People calling you all sorts of names and just terrible names, and you know. So Jimmy was making the point that you know, we've come a long way, but. Can you give a little bit of inspiration for cats listening all over the world because the world is in mourning too. I mean, it's the world is shaken to the core by this unpredictable, sort of unstable person. And like, what is your advice into how to?
You know what I think, Jake, is that, you know, you really have to not trust what you see on television about this man. Of course, he's a whole nother animal. You know, he's a millionaire and all of these things. But we don't really know anything about this man other than what they put on this TV about him. So we're going to see what he's going to do, if he's going to dismantle all of this stuff that Obama's tried to put in, you know, health care and stuff like that. We're going to see what he's going to do about this. And he's surrounded with a bunch of jerks. So it's going to be difficult for him to do anything different from the way that he's
portrayed himself.
Portrayed on the television. I think all of that's a lot of TV stuff, you know, that he did to get these people excited enough and draw in all of these haters. He did a wonderful job on getting all these haters excited and got them out to vote for him.
Let me ask you.
So
Yeah,
go ahead.
Well, I just think I'm going to ask you, based on past history, because again, I was born in 1978, and this is, I thought it was a post-racial society, but you know, I'm way off, and I'm curious as if like you said, let's say he duped all these haters into voting for him, and he turns out to be more progressive than Bernie Sanders.
We don't know.
No,
yeah,
but my question is, will the haters go along with him just because he looks like them? Will they capitulate and be hypocrites Will they follow him just because he's white?
Well, they're going to follow him, yeah, because of a lot of things, because of what he said, and like they follow everybody because of what all of these politicians. Obama said a lot of stuff that he wasn't able to do. Guantanamo is still got people in jail over there, and he said he's going to free those people, and he's done a lot, but a lot of stuff he couldn't do, and it's the same going to be with Trump. A lot of stuff he said he's not going to be able to follow through with a lot of that. But he did win, and we just have to see what's going to happen. We don't know.
Tootie, I love you, and I'll be in touch. We'll do part 2.
Okay,
in the
Jake,
next
thank
couple
you.
weeks.
I love you too, brother,
All
and
right.
I'll talk to you soon.
Later on, brother.
Okay, bye.
Peace, yeah. Just heard from Albert Tootie Heath, and we'll be back with Leah Vuno right after this.